Get that game at home, you're 10-6. Right there, you have 10 wins with a game to spare. And then Seattle coming in. But I actually kind of think the Niners may not even need that game. They might be able to clinch Week 17 at 10-6.
On the show today from KNBR on his way to New York this week, he's going to be doing Niners pregame from MetLife Stadium. So he'll be the first person to check out the grass. They say it's new grass, different grass than the last grass is the old grass, the new grass, so much better at MetLife. John Dickinson is here. And he is brought to us today by our friends at Puesto Mexicano Moderno. They don't have a home game, the Niners, so you can't go into the stadium to get your Puesto this week, but you can go to their locations in the Bay Area, one in Concord, one in Santa Clara, and locations in Southern California. And so we'll tell you more about Puesto, but I know JD's a big Puesto guy, which we can get to JD's love for Puesto coming up. But first... the trade deadline is quickly approaching. The 49ers have one more game before that deadline. They did acquire a player this week. And, I think one of the big questions, JD, and it was interesting just watching Kyle Shanahan on Wednesday talking about how physically beat up Jauan Jennings has been and that he's getting better. We talk about all the guys that they could bring in. I do think one of the big questions this week is Jauan Jennings on his way out. Multiple reports. You get your Jeremy Fowler, you get your Dan Graziano. And I'm torn on this, and I need your help because on one hand, he's one of your best receivers, even as it stands today. Led you in targets and catches on Sunday. On the other hand, you're not getting a ton, even from one of your best receivers, and he's not coming back to this team next year. So if you're going to make another move that costs you a 5th-round pick, can you get one back for Jauan Jennings? And then you ask the natural question, well, who is giving you? Would you give a 5th for Jauan Jennings right now? So what do you think? Are we about to watch Jauan Jennings' last game as a 49er?
I think it's possible, although it sure didn't sound like Kyle Shanahan believed it was possible. No, if you watched the press conferences we both did earlier on Wednesday afternoon. But I think if you could get a 5th, short answer, I think the 49ers would probably do it, considering the headache that Jauan Jennings has been. And I kind of found myself in the Houston game sitting there at NRG Stadium wondering, are the Niners throwing it to Jauan Jennings because he's the most open receiver that they have? Or are they throwing it to Jauan Jennings because Jauan Jennings is pissed off because he hasn't been getting the rock as much when he's been on the field? And the numbers for Jennings, it's just he's struggled. He's not had a good year. I know Kyle alluded to the fact that he's been extremely banged up really throughout the course of the entire season. But the energy has just been off from Jauan Jennings from the outset, going back to training camp. And he was not going to show up, and then he did show up, and then he was injured, and we didn't know what the heck was going on. Is it contract related? They give him those little incentive bumps immediately. And then I think he has been legitimately injured after that, going back to the early part of the season. And so he's been in and out of the lineup a little bit. So if you could get a 5th for Jauan Jennings, I think Jauan Jennings probably is playing his last game with the 49ers, but I don't think you can get a 5th for Jauan Jennings because I think everybody knows the situation. So I think the Niners could be, it could make some sense to move him, but I will say this, they better be absolutely freaking sure that Brandon Ayuk is coming back here and going to be, a real productive wide receiver, and that Ricky Pearsall is coming back in short order, and he's going to be a really productive wide receiver. If you have those two, plus Kendrick Bourne, plus DeMarcus Robinson, then I think you've got a capable enough top 4 to close out the season and attempt to make the playoffs. If you think you're going to be short in any one of those 4 spots, then you might as well just keep Jauan Jennings, because I think he's probably at this point going for more like a 7th or a conditional 7 that turns into a 6 than anything above that.
I thought DeMarcus Robinson would have given him more by this point in the year, especially given how thin they are. Like you say, okay, how's he going to get touches when Ayuk is back and Kittle's healthy and Jauan Jennings is getting all the 3rd down targets and Ricky Pearsall, who was one of the best receivers in the NFL for the first month, but that hasn't been. There've been nothing but opportunities, and it hasn't worked. And he dropped the ball 2 weeks ago on the deep shot from Mac Jones. And I thought his floor would be higher. I didn't think he'd be a high ceiling guy. I thought his floor would be higher. And that's kind of where Jauan is. I think his floor should be pretty high, and that's what's been frustrating. And I do think you got to attribute some of it to the injury. I think you got to give him some of that. I think he's earned that. But to your point, the vibe has been off. And he's a guy that feels like what kind of drives his performance is his emotion in a good way. And maybe it's hurt it. But like Jordan Watkins isn't about to, be your playmaker.
Non-factor. Yeah. Jordan Watkins a non-factor. And we saw it even in the one ball in Houston. He's just not ready to go up and make. Yeah. Was it thrown a little high? Sure. But he's just not ready to go up and make that play.
Right through no receiver would tell you anything other than you got to catch that ball.
And look, that's a tough, first potential NFL catch, but it just shows to me that you're not getting much from him in the second half of the year.
Keion White, there's so much to hit. But Keion White, I think, is interesting because this is the guy the Niners traded for a 6th, 7th round swap. And I think he's not Bryce Huff, but to me, the common thread with Bryce Huff is Bryce Huff was in a situation last year that wasn't the best for Bryce Huff. And he came to a coach who knows him in Robert Saleh, and they found the way to make the most of his skill set. Now, they don't know Keion White in the same way, but Keion White's had 3 different head coaches in 3 years. That is the kind of guy with talent that you say, maybe we can find a way, especially because, his 5 sacks last year matched the 3rd highest total for the Niners. That would have been tied for 3rd on the Niners last year. Coaching change, he's out, production down, but still young enough and talented enough. So to me, that's a Saleh addition right there.
It is. And it's one in which you don't have to give up hardly anything. And I know Kyle Shanahan said they really liked the way he played against the 49ers going back to the early part of the season, last season at Levi's. And
which is always a little.
Yeah, you always that always you kind of wonder, all right, what's going on there? But and they they like his tape. They like his tape.
They probably liked him coming out, right? Or Saleh liked him coming out.
So they had to do something. I think the bottom line is they had to do something without really giving up much. So they add him. I thought the biggest takeaway, and I go back to it reminded me on a smaller scale of something that Kyle Shanahan said to me and Greg Papa. We were doing the draft show back at Levi's on draft night, and we were talking about Mykel Williams, and I asked Kyle, how important it was to factor in drafting Mykel Williams, the fact that he can play outside and inside. And Kyle loves those guys that can play outside and then slide inside. And Mykel Williams, that was a big part of the allure, Kyle said, in drafting him was that versatility. And Kyle did talk about that versatility for Keion White in his press conference. So I think it's interesting. He's somebody that they can put on the outside, but also has the ability to move to the inside. And the Niners really are at a point where they need help. They need help everywhere. And they also had Cleveland Ferrell, who they had in 2023, the former Raider draft pick that didn't pan out for them and then ended up with the 49ers in 2023 and was a part of that team that went to the Super Bowl. So they add him back, and it's just they need bodies. I mean, that's the big thing along the D-line. They just don't have enough bodies. They're not getting production, but they also are low, I think, on NFL quality depth, especially with the injuries continuing to pile up over the course of these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, they are. It's like, do you need this? Yes. Do you need this? Yes. Which one do you want? Yes, both. And, it's benefited them on offense for sure, because that's Christian's thing. It's like, well, we'll down several receivers. That's okay. We'll throw it to Christian McCaffrey. So, obviously getting Kittle back's a big deal. Where are you at, JD, with, The Athletic has their NFL playoff simulator. And right now, the Niners, according to that, have a 73% chance of making the playoffs. By the way, I got to give credit to producer Connor, who wrote about this on his Substack, Joko show. But 73% sounds pretty good, but it's the 3rd best odds in the division. The Seahawks at 84%, the Rams at 90%. And, I think you beat the Rams in 2 weeks, and this thing changes quite a bit. But that's still a playoff team. That right now the projection is a 3 teams representing the NFC West. This is a major swing game. this week in the whole thing. You got to beat the New York Giants.
You really do. I think, and the Giants are back to being in shambles with the Scadaboo injury now, and they were looking like they were in position to have some action when they had the big lead in Denver. They had just beaten Philadelphia at home, and then they let that game get away in Denver with the massive fourth quarter that the Broncos had.
Was it 33?
Yeah, and they end up, and then they go ahead after they blow the lead, and then they still leave enough time to where the Broncos go down and win it. And then, they get crushed by Philadelphia. They were kind of hanging in the game early, but it ends up being, a Philly walk, but they lose Scadaboo, who's been, along with Jackson Dart, the two players that really flipped the script on what looked like it was going to be a completely lost season a month or so ago. And then it looked like, oh, this is going to be a tough, they're beating Philly inside MetLife Stadium. They're beating the Chargers when the Chargers were smoking to begin the year at MetLife Stadium. You're thinking, wow, this could be a potentially really difficult game. Or I'm at with the Niners, though, at this point. And I do think, you look at the NFC standings, they're the seventh best team. They are the third best team in the division as they're currently constituted. I know they got the early wins against Seattle and LA, and that's why they are still where they are at 5-3. But I look at it not so much that the Niners are in this race with the Rams and the Seahawks, although they are, because they have the head-to-head win and they're only a half game back. But I feel like it's more they're in this race with the Bears and the Panthers and the Cowboys and the Falcons and the Vikings and maybe the Commanders. And I think that race is very much a race that the 49ers can win. And I do think, and I've said this since the Fred Warner injury going back a couple of weeks ago, Guy, there is a pathway to the 49ers getting to 10 wins and making the playoffs, likely as a 7 seed, likely as the third team from the NFC West that gets in. And I think that would be a really successful season considering the circumstances and all the injuries. The Niners have shown an inability when things have gone off the rails from an injury standpoint to hold a season together. I mean, you look at the examples of, even go back to 2018, they couldn't do it after Garoppolo gets hurt. You look at 2020 after they get to the Super Bowl during COVID. And then last year, the other year coming off of the Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs, everything just falls apart, primarily due to injuries. So I think this team's showing a little bit of a moxie and a hold it together that they haven't in other years. So I give them credit for that. And I think, you know what, sometimes your ceiling winds up being getting in and getting beat in the first round. And I don't think that should be considered, given everything that's gone on, to be a real, just a colossal failure of a season. But I've got my path that I'll get to here in terms of the remaining schedule. We'll play the schedule game a little bit if you want, but I think it's a very realistic path for the Niners to beat out all those teams beneath them on the screen and get into that 7 seed.
Yeah, 3 things. One, on the schedule, which we can get to, but yeah, you think like, okay, well, who else would make the playoffs if you don't? And you kind of hit on it. I don't like any of these teams.
Yeah, well, you're going to play Chicago and you're going to play Carolina.
Chicago, and you've beaten Atlanta. You got Dallas as well at 3-4. We know the good thing is we know the Cowboys' DNA.
If anything, Minnesota and Washington are the teams to look out for, but right. They're going to have to play great football. Like Minnesota's going to have to go 7-3 probably to close the year. Yeah, Washington's going to have to go 8-2 or something to close the year.
Like you just got to me. You look at quarterback upside. Like Dak could beat some people, and maybe Washington finds it on offense, right? But like I don't see that with Minnesota. I don't see that with Atlanta.
It's not in my mind Chicago, Carolina, or Dallas, even though those currently are the closest teams to the 49ers.
Yeah, the one thing is Dallas, or even Atlanta. Though I don't love, the DNA of the Cowboys is is not great. But they do that this grouping of teams, like Dak could go throw for 340 and beat somebody and be a 500 team. But number 2, to your point on injuries, the difference is like, if your backup quarterback has to win you a couple of games, you're usually toast. Like they can win you 2 out of 4, and you feel really happy if your starter misses 4 games and the backup goes 5-5. It goes 2-2. Like that's like what the Chiefs do, or maybe they go 3-1 with whoever. But that's the difference this year. Is the 49ers have a backup quarterback who's better than a backup quarterback in Mac Jones. So, but we can talk about Brock. But let's do the schedule game real quick because this week, the Giants, then the Rams at home. I think I did it the other day. The Niners' remaining schedule is,
It's why they've got a shot.
Yeah, it's why they've got a shot. I've got
Mac Jones is the other reason
30
they've got
and 35.
Shot,
30 and 35. 30 and 35 is their remaining opponent's record. And up until their bye, which is week 14, you've got 2-6 Giants, 5-2 Rams, 2-5 Arizona, 4-4 Carolina, 2-5 Cleveland. So what is that? 2, 4, 6, 10, 15, and 10, 18? No, 10. This is great. I'm doing math. 10, 6, 24. So, their next handful of games, these teams are well under 500.
Yeah, and so here's how I look at it pretty simply, and to the point on Mac Jones. I mean, if they didn't have Mac Jones, they'd be 2-6 or 1-7, and it would be a completely
or Brock would be
over.
Brock would be playing way too soon,
and he would be looking probably worse for having forced himself to come back a little bit too soon, which definitely doesn't help Brock. But I'll just go through it very quickly. The Niners are 5-3. They've got 9 games to go. And I was just kind of looking at it and mapped through it. And look, a lot of 49er fans probably aren't going to like some of the games I give them as losses. It doesn't mean they're going to lose these games. But as I've said a lot on KNBR, I think the Niners have enough talent to win, I would say, 7 or 8 of the last 9, but they also could lose maybe 7 or 8 of the last 9. Like, they truly, I think, play for the most part a lot of 50-50 games here between now and the end of the year. But here's how I mapped it out. And
that's a them thing. They just are kind of,
but the point is, like, the Giants game is not a lock for them. But they've also shown that they might beat the Rams, in addition to that. But none of these games, going and playing Cleveland is, as they're currently constituted with Cleveland's defense at 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific time on November 30th, the Thanksgiving weekend, that's a game they could lose. They haven't won a game, by the way, in Cleveland, I think since 1992. Something like that. They haven't won a game. They haven't played there a lot. They got beat there when they were 5-0 2 years ago. But yeah, there's two cities that stand out. It's different stadiums, but it's Cleveland and Minnesota. I think you got to go back to like the early 90s for both of them, where the Niners, for all the greatness, and I mean, we're talking about Super Bowl teams that would go there, and Steve Young losing to Bernie Kosar or whatever the hell it was, going back 30 plus years. The Niners haven't won a game in Cleveland since I think the early 90s, if memory serves. But all right, I'm going to run through it here. The way I have it mapped out, and this is their pathway to get to 10, got to beat the Giants. Got to beat the New York Giants. That gets you to 6-3 real quick. I'm giving them an L against the Rams, so that you're 6-4. I think the Rams are a better team at this stage. We know the Niners can. Look, you get any of these games I'm counting as L's, then it only helps you either offset one of the games that I'm counting as wins. But to me, then it comes down to, so you're 6-4 going into what I consider a 3-game stretch: Arizona in the desert, home Monday Night Football against Carolina, and at the Browns. So you're 6-4 going into that stretch. You got to go 2-1. You can win any 2 of those 3. I think the most likely for sure win is probably the home game on Monday Night Football against Carolina. So split the 2 road games, Arizona and Cleveland. Is that fair? Is that a fair ask for this team? You might not win them both, but split those 2, beat Carolina.
Yeah.
You do that, you're 8-5. 8-5, considering everything going into December and then going into your bye week. You come out of your bye week and you play Tennessee. So, I mean, that's the only game remaining on the schedule that I think is a true lock, have to get, should get, will get, kind of a game. If you don't get, then call the whole thing off. So Tennessee puts you to 9-5. And again, I think I'm being pretty fair and level-headed on this. Then you go to Indy in Monday Night Football in December. Okay, the Colts are playing great. Maybe they're not playing as great a month and a half from now, but you can take an L in that game. You're 9-6. And then the last, that sets you up for Sunday Night Football at home against the Bears, a team that may or may not be in the race with you for that final wild card spot. But get that game at home, you're 10-6. Right there, you have 10 wins with a game to spare, and then Seattle coming in the early part of January for Week 18 in the finale. You may need that game depending upon tiebreakers and where other teams are at, but I actually kind of think the Niners may not even need that game. They might be able to clinch week 17 at 10-6 and not even need the Seattle game for a final wild card spot potentially. So that's the path. Beat the Giants, 2 out of 3, Arizona, Carolina, Cleveland. Then you got to beat Tennessee and the Bears. You can take losses to Seattle and Indy. Again, one of the 3, Arizona, Carolina, Cleveland, and you can lose to the Rams as long as you beat the Giants. And you're 10-7. And I think in this NFC, considering the standings that you put up there with all of those teams beneath them, that gets you in. That gets you in. And it's not anything. It's not any crazy ask. I'm not asking them to beat Seattle again or the Rams again or Indy at all here between now and the end of the regular season. So it's very much in my mind attainable. I think it's attainable with not much more adding to the roster in terms of the trade deadline. I know everybody's in a froth over that because it's coming up and it's a great talking point, and the Niners reportedly have been very active, but I don't know, because of the schedule, they're in a realistic position that I think 9 years out of 10 or 7 years out of 8, they probably wouldn't be in, but they're in this spot and you might as well try to use it to your advantage and just get in the dance and see what happens.
Yeah. And I do think there's a value in that with a young team.
Totally.
With a young team, there's a value in let's go play a playoff game and see what that feels like.
And you don't want to be 2 years in a row of, well, you went 6-11 and then you went 7-10 or whatever it is, and you missed 2 years, then that starts to maybe affect your culture. That's really been one thing Kyle Shanahan's been able to avoid. Yeah, they were 6-10 the first year, but remember they were 1-10. Then they get Jimmy Garoppolo, and they end up they finished that year with an extreme high in terms of momentum. It kind of got nuked the next year because of the Jimmy Garoppolo injury, but then you're in the Super Bowl. You have a bad year, you bounce back. You have 3 good years. You have a bad year, you bounce back. So I think in the trajectory of Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch kind of keeping a hold on the culture that they've built, it's important to have one of those. It feels very John Harbaugh or Mike Tomlin. We kind of did. We weren't very good this year, but we still won 10 games and made the playoffs.
Right. That's right. On our worst day, we're still we are respectable. Yeah. Which you don't hang banners for that. The other thing sneaky is I hate to say this. I don't want to pocket watch another man's money. But
extension time?
No. What I was just going to say is the playoffs make it, the longer your team plays, the harder it is to hire your coaches. And I don't know. It's hard to gauge. I haven't really looked at what the coach market's going to look like yet for Robert Saleh. But, I think you have to accept that he's not going to be your defensive coordinator forever, but you'd like him for another year.
You would. However, I thought about this, and it was the first time I've thought.
You don't want to lose Gus Bradley?
Well, no, I've thought who's going to be the DC next year? And this was before the Houston game. The defense didn't look great against Houston.
I think it's him or Gus Bradley.
Well, I've got a wild card name for you. And I go back 2 weeks ago to Kyle Shanahan, and the name perked in my head, and I thought, oh, okay. What about Raheem Morris?
Yeah, Falcons gets fired.
And as the Falcons now are kind of a mess, it looked like, this could be a really good team. And now
that's interesting.
So and Kyle 2 weeks ago, I think it was today, in the lead up to the game against the Falcons, he's talking about how how much he loves Raheem Morris, and he's tried to hire him before to be on his staff, and so we'll see what happens ultimately with the Falcons. But I'm to the point, because it had gone so well with the 49ers defense, even after they lost Bosa, even after they lost Fred Warner in the game against the Falcons, that I'm almost assuming Saleh's going to be gone. And I have started, it wasn't planned, but when Kyle mentioned Raheem Morris, it kind of clicked. Well, the Niners might be looking for a DC, and he really likes Raheem Morris, and Raheem Morris has been at DC before at an extremely high level. So maybe he could be somebody that winds up in that mix next year.
He's in the tree. You could have Morris and Mike McDaniel. That'll be an interesting one. What happens with Miami?
He's gone too.
But then what does he choose to do next? Does he come back, or does he need to stay away? You know what I mean? That whole thing's interesting. Once the tree matures enough, we're just getting to the point of your tree now. Guys get fired. I haven't really had that yet. Saleh, right? McDaniel, Bobby Slowick. The tree was still pretty young. Guys weren't getting fired yet and having an opportunity to come back.
I gotta think Kyle would take Mike McDaniel back.
Oh, I think he would in a heartbeat. And I think I don't know that Mike. Does Mike want to do that?
I think Mike would love getting. Can I use the term glazed? Is that? But you're gonna have to edit that out.
But don't you think Mike would want? You can say that. But don't you think Mike would want to go call an offense? Like what? You don't.
I think I would think Mike would love to come back and be weird and
but you don't call the offense
and speak every Thursday and just have everybody talk about how funny he is.
But you don't call the offense.
And he's weird and funny and cool.
He doesn't call the offense. Don't you want to call the offense?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like a sabbatical year. Like a sabbatical year.
I know. But coaches don't think of stuff like that. Coaches don't.
Yeah,
coaches all say like, it's nice to take the pressure off and just coach ball again. And then the second somebody offers them $12 million to be a head coach, they go take it. Understandable.
You know what? Let me ask you this: who's paying Mike McDaniel to call plays for him next year? I'll just take it the other way. Like
Saleh.
Okay, that's possible. No, it's good. That's touche. That's a great answer. Stick that in your hat, JD. That's a good
Belichick?
answer.
No.
At North Carolina or
yeah.
or at Atlanta.
John
Are they going to give Belichick the Falcons job now?
At Virginia Tech.
Yeah,
the college jobs are off the charts this year.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of money there now even at schools that you wouldn't think there would maybe be a lot of money. So McDaniel will have options, but I don't know. I mean, he's. I don't want to say he seemed overwhelmed. It's still Miami. I mean, Miami's pretty soft. He'd have been been run out of a lot of other places, I think, quicker with his act, shall we say? Although I think it's genuine. I say it's his act, but it's genuine. He's a great mind. The personality for McDaniel just doesn't do it for me. And it's actually a wonder to me that he's been able to be a head coach for as long as he's been able to be a head coach, considering the way he kind of operates and speaks. I would have thought that it would have worn much sooner. And I really don't even get the impression that it's really worn.
It's just they're losing.
They're just losing. So in fairness, I know I'm kind of crushing Mike McDaniel, but I do think he's a talented offensive staff member, to be sure. And a good guy. I don't think he's fake. I just think he's a little weird, and I don't get how it plays in NFL locker rooms.
JD's appearance brought to you by Puesto Mexicano Moderno, the Adler brothers. Just incredible food, and big Niner fans. I know JD loves to hang. Again, not a home game, but this is what I say about Puesto. The food is great. The vibe is great. The vibe is like McCaffrey. It can be date night. It can be boys' night. It can be business lunch. Very versatile. So anyway, you don't have to say anything about Puesto, but I know you sincerely love Puesto. So
I do, and I mean for the for time purposes, I won't, but I absolutely love myself a filet mignon taco, or 3 or maybe 5.
I know you're a big margarita guy.
Big margarita guy, and I have them spice it up. I know that my guy in Santa Clara working behind the bar, I said, well, do you do a spicy? And he's like, well, we can, I can. It was I had a fantastic experience there. I think it was week 2. It was the week 2 Thursday night game.
It was Thursday, yeah.
And it was a Thursday night game, and it was one of those where, as you know, the 49er practice and media availability is much later in the afternoon, and I'm coming back up to Walnut Creek. So I'm getting done post practice, and it's basically by the time you're getting done working, it's about time for kickoff. So do I want to go have a marg or two and some filet mignon tacos and watch it? It was Buffalo, Miami, actually. That was the game that I watched at the Santa Clara Puesto, and had I'm trying to remember. Did I order? I think I ordered 2 and then ordered 2 more tacos, or they were so good, and I love the margs too. So
all right,
I said I wasn't going to do that. Shameless. I'm shameless, Jay. I'm a shameless guy. But it's Jay, legitimate. It's legitimate.
I know it is.
I predate your sponsorship with my love for Puesto.
Yes, you do.
It's a true story.
Yes, you do. And you didn't even know that they they were presenting you today. And then you found that out right before we started recording. I know it
was like Christmas morning.
You can go spend the money at Puesto. Yeah.
It was like Christmas morning, man. It was amazing.
All right, JD, have a great trip to New York, where the turf is different than the last time the Niners were there. I'm not sure if it's better, but it's different. So yeah, do with that what you will. Different turf than Houston. Like Houston uses, the Texans have the same turf as SoFi. Different brand. It's not Field Turf brand. It's some other brand out of like Atlanta.
Yeah, and the Niners have liked that turf more than the turf that they last played on in 2020, but it's not that turf anymore, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, we think. I mean,
until they lose somebody significant on Sunday.
Okay. All right. I wouldn't mind the Giants trading a defensive lineman before the game.
It's the Serrano Margarita, by the way. It's the I want to get the name right. It's the Serrano Margarita, and I just had them loaded up with extra spice.
That's got the yuzu.
Yes, it does. Yes,
I love the yuzu,
which is phenomenal. Yes,
yuzu.
I love it. I love that. Love that marg. That's the go-to marg for your guy at Puesto, and then and then the short rib birria.
The short rib quesadilla taco is my personal favorite.
Yes.
Because you get the.
That's my other go-to. The melted cheese. It's amazing.
The melted, crispy, just the Mexico City style. All right. Thanks, JD.
Shameless.